All right, guys, we're going to try that again. So, a bit of a tip for you pro live streamers or new live streamers. It really helps if you unmute your microphone for a live stream. We don't have a Jamie here, so we're kind of doing this ourselves. But we have a lot to cover today. Welcome back to Layer 3 Live. This is the show for network engineers and IT professionals. And today we got a lot to cover. We are going to talk about a couple things, but the biggest story of the night is that SpaceX has acquired xAI, and this is via TechCrunch here. We're going to dig into the article here in just a second. So yeah, Elon's SpaceX has officially acquired xAI, which actually makes it the most valuable private company in the world. If you guys don't remember, it's not just xAI encompassed in this. Earlier last year, xAI actually bought X Corp, which is the company that behind Twitter. Right? So Twitter now became X. X got bought by xAI, and now xAI got bought by SpaceX. So why would they do this? And there's kind of two reasons, and we're going to get into. The first is philosophy. So you guys know I really like to reason from first principles. Well, what's the mission of SpaceX? Well, it's to make life multiplanetary. They're doing that with reusable rockets, with Starship, with colonizing Mars in the future. It's the goal of SpaceX, but it's really the short-term goal. The long-term goal is really to understand and colonize, basically spread humanity throughout through the stars. Obviously, I'm a big SpaceX fan, big aeronautics fan. It's pretty cool. Love what they're doing. Seen a lot of Starship launches. If you haven't got a chance to see it, it's really worth the flight to South Texas. It's amazing. It's truly like the engineering marvel. It's incredible. But let's talk about xAI. So what kind of separates xAI from other from other AIs, like you have Claude, obviously ChatGPT, Gemini, is the ordering of priorities. So ChatGPT is trained to be helpful, but it also needs to be truthful. Grok flips that. So Grok's fundamental principle is it needs to be truthful, and its mission is to understand the universe. You can imagine AI is very likely going to help us solve a lot of problems that we're not going to be able to solve without a great deal of computational capability. And so really the core mission of Grok is not to be helpful to humans. It's really to understand the universe. And so you have SpaceX, who's trying to explore the universe, and Grok, who's trying to understand the universe. That's actually a very aligned mission. And one of the things I'm curious about is, does it even make sense for a publicly traded company? Because while they've done very well to generate a great deal of revenue, that doesn't seem like something that stocks folks, investors are really going to care about, right? They care about the next quarter. In fact, one of the challenges of having a publicly traded company is that people can be so focused on the quarterly earnings that they can neglect a longer-term vision that may even be more profitable. Now, one of the other issues that this is for is financial. So AI companies are not profitable. You probably heard some reports of OpenAI perhaps being bankrupt. They will almost certainly never become bankrupt. They may get bought, sold. They may have negative earnings. There's too much riding on the future of AI. And so the big question is, will this be a dot-com bubble? Will it pop and AI just kind of reach a plateau? And it might, although I suspect it won't, and that there'll be a certain point in which the return on investment will be 10x. And you see that with some of the stuff we talked about last week, with AI evolving, perhaps. Some interesting stuff if you want to go read about the CEO of Claude had an AI model running on his machine, and it figured out how to use FFmpeg and then use OpenAI's Whisper. It found an API key for it to communicate in voice, even though the model was not trained on how to use voice. There's other instances of AI models being able to actually learn entire languages with only a few prompts in those languages. So it is getting to the point where can AI come up with original thoughts? I would say, in my opinion, no. Could be wrong in that, but it does seem like it's able to solve problems that we didn't even train it to solve. So there's the financial question there, right? The other point I would bring up is the operational. So how do we actually build data centers, right? Because it's really an AI arms race that we're seeing. You have these titans, right? And not an exaggeration, trillions of dollars at play here. And you have a couple major competitors. I think the most putting resources in is going to be OpenAI and xAI, and the others are going to be number 3 behind those two, just in terms of the cost and the resources being invested. And you can see that with what they've done with Colossus. If you guys aren't familiar with Colossus, there's a video on it. You can find on YouTube a tour of it, but it's xAI's data center in Memphis, Tennessee, and it is insane. So here we go, Colossus. So this is insane. This was a former range factory. So they made ovens essentially, and they converted it in months to be the world's most powerful computer. And you can see some of the stats here. Just as someone who works with technology and computers professionally, these numbers just don't even compute in my brain. They're just insane. But one of the biggest problems, and it's actually why, like, one of the reasons that companies would choose the location for their data centers to build AI, it's a couple of things. So economics here are at a whole different caliber. It's quite insane because you think about this. They want to build these so quickly and launch them so quickly because the time that a GPU, which is how most AI computation is being used for, is being done on a GPU. The time that the useful lifespan of that GPU is months to a year, maybe a bit more, but its efficiency drops off. If you ever built a gaming PC, you know that like a GPU is really, in some sense, a item that will expire. There comes a point in which 15 years from now that GPU is useless. That's true in AI, but make it a year. And so the reason for that is power. See, the biggest engineering challenge with building new AI data centers is not compute, it's not networking. Practically speaking, it is power. And that's why in this case, you can see, there's a lot of power lines coming in. It's the biggest challenge. Now, the other problem with that is we have cooling. We have to cool these data centers. That takes a lot of power and efficiency loss because, it's in the double percentage points, usually like 30+% that's used to cool data center, not just provide compute. And obviously, we have networking, and frankly, networking is not a bottleneck. We have 800 gig optics, which is insane now. And I think there's some providers now working on more than a terabyte per second optics, which a terabit per second is insane. And we're talking about on a single piece of glass, which is ridiculous. But so when you take those problems, the other interesting thing about how we do AI computation nowadays is usually it's all clustering, right? It's either using Kubernetes or Docker, some form of clustering container. This is general in any AI provider. They're doing something like this because when you're building a very large model, that might take months, right? Or to basically compile this model. You don't want to have a single component failure cause that to be corrupted. Could you imagine if you're rendering a video on 10,000 computers over 6 months, and if one computer dies, you lose the whole model? So we already have infrastructure that's built in such a way where we can lose a node or two and we're fine, right? We can configure all of that data. So how do we solve these problems? We need to have a cool environment. We need to have the ability to generate power efficiently and cleanly, ideally. We need to have network connectivity, and we need a lot of space. There's a lot of space in space. It's cool. It's in a vacuum. We have solar energy, which is way more efficient outside of the atmosphere. We can place satellites in an orbit that will give us basically 24/7 access to the sun. And, well, the reality is these are very, very multi-billion-dollar data centers that are somewhat disposable, which is crazy to think of a multi-billion-dollar asset as disposable. But after 24, 36 months, it may not be worth the, we wouldn't launch that same hardware again. That being said, if you already have this data center in space, and its efficiency drops, but the power cost is zero, we just keep it up there. And it's not as efficient as the newer data centers we launch, but we don't have a power bill. So the point to where it's worth scrapping the GPUs never comes. We just let it, when it gets hit by a meteor or, stops working, we abandon it or put it in a graveyard orbit or deorbit it. And it sounds crazy that the simplest The simplest thing to do is to put something in space, but in this case, it actually is. Now, a couple problems with this. You need the ability to launch a lot of payload into space. SpaceX is doing that with Falcon Heavy and Falcon 9. But Starship's interesting because now we're talking about the cost being, $5 or $10 million per launch. That's pennies for a company that's building multi-billion-dollar data centers. It also enables us to be very efficient because at a certain scale of if you've ever toured a data center, the percentage of the actual floor space that's used for computers versus networking versus cooling versus power is not the majority. Maybe it's a third or a fourth of the data center. Some are really efficient. Maybe half the data center is actually, used for compute. Well, when you have a smaller area and you have a vacuum and cool environment, you're able to maximize that. Now, the other cool thing is we can use radiators in space to actually send that heat out, and that can be done very cost effectively. It's not expensive from a power perspective. It just takes up a lot of space, but we can fold them in. And there was a big debate that was had years ago of what's the first industry. Now, contrast what SpaceX is doing, making life multiplanetary, with what Jeff Bezos' vision is, and they actually do align. What Jeff Bezos wants to do with Blue Origin is he says, when I create an Amazon, right? I'm Jeff Bezos in this context. When I create an Amazon, I already had the internet. So I already had the road infrastructure. I already had UPS, FedEx, and the USPS. But so you can do that from your dorm room. You can do that as a startup with very little capital. Today, there isn't a way for the next generation of students in their dorm rooms to create the next space startup. And so what he wants to do is build that commercial infrastructure for that to happen. So you can do manufacturing, you can do robotics, you can do exploration, all these things. And his vision is to move heavy industry off the earth, and basically we can rezone the earth as residential and light industry, which is awesome. I thought one of the first uses of space manufacturing would be high precision fiber optics, because doing it in a zero gravity environment would enable us to make very precise optics. And I might be wrong here. It looks like the first use of space is going to be AI compute data centers, which, by the way, if anyone is a story writer, that would be an incredible AI horror movie to have. They have to launch missiles and basically take out the satellites that is running the AI. Now, these are going to be used probably for model training, but it's very interesting. It also, you could also see where there's a need for compute in space in general, because if you don't have the latency of having to go up, back, and down for satellite connectivity, most people think that space is what we use to connect the internet together. We don't. We use underground fiber, but there may very well be a future in which that is the more efficient means, because it is significantly harder for someone to take out a satellite than it is to cut fiber, right? Almost anyone with any amount of minimal resource, basically any government's intelligence agency can disrupt a communications network. It's a lot harder to disrupt a telecommunications network in space if it is set up redundantly. So super interesting, guys. Yeah, I wonder when we'll see the first in space. Probably a year or two, be my guess, but that's crazy. I suspect they're already working on designs. Alrighty, so next on the topic of space, this is interesting. So officially, NASA is now allowing astronauts to bring their iPhones into space. I thought this was already a thing. If you look at a lot of the Dragon photos, there's some iPhones in those photos, but I guess this is a bit different. So okay, yes, this is regarding Crew 12 and Artemis 2. So Crew 12 is going to go on Dragon spacecraft to the ISS. and Artemis 2. If you guys have not heard about this, it's the biggest story of perhaps this decade. We're going back to the moon next month. We're going to be launching 4 astronauts around the moon. They'll actually be further away from the Earth than any human being has ever been, further than Apollo 13. And so, yeah, Apple's going to let them use or NASA rather is going to let them use iPhones, which is there's a lot of testing that goes into that, because I don't know if you guys know, these things have batteries, and batteries exploding in space is really not good. One of the most dangerous things that can happen in space is a fire. It actually was responsible for a great catastrophe on the Mir space station. Before the ISS, the Russians had a space station in the 80s and 90s called Mir. It's pretty interesting. It's a multi-module station. It's one of those that there's so little known about, and it kind of feels like a lost piece of history. Like, it's almost science fiction is how it feels when you study Mir. It's worth reading into. Okay, out of space news, because I will use any way I can get space news into this podcast, but let's talk about something that I am excited about, hopefully, and that is Apple finally working on a Studio Display 2, maybe a Pro Display XDR 2. Now, I've been running I've running Studio Displays for, 5 years now, and I've been waiting for an upgrade, and I cannot tell you how many times I have been excited for an upgrade, looking at other monitors, and waited for the Studio Display, only to find out that it's not actually going to come out this year. It's happened like 5 or 6 times. There's like 10 articles on Mac Rumors talking about Apple working on a Studio Display, but it looks like this time it's actually going to happen, maybe for the next month or two. Now, some of you guys are like, why the heck would anyone buy a Studio Display? And it comes down to color and accuracy. If you've ever used an iPhone or a MacBook, the display is just so much more color accurate. The colors are better. You don't have vignetting. You don't have different brightnesses. It just is fantastic. And the Studio Display, while 60 hertz Apple, which is annoying, has just perfect colors. It is a MacBook display. It is an iPhone display. It is identical to my MacBook. So that's really hard to unsee that. And then being 5K at 27 inches, you just don't see pixels. And when you don't see pixels, you kind of get used to not seeing pixels. And so I've looked at 4K 32-inch displays, and I really like the 32-inch form factor, especially OLED, but it's really hard when you start to see pixels. And then on macOS, the aspect ratios get all funky and just weird. Now, personally, I also have, for my gaming PC, I run an LG 42-inch TV. Now, it's one of the special TVs that was kind of a secret gaming monitor. It's kind of like LG testing the waters to see if OLED will work for a gaming monitor before OLED gaming monitors were really a thing. And I love it. It's 120 hertz. It's giant. I can just immerse myself. Curve would probably be better, but it's great. I can use it as a TV as well. 42 inches is probably a little too big, but I love it. It's great. And the 120 hertz is awesome. I've demoed monitors that are higher. 120 hertz is enough for me. I'm content with that. Now, what are the things that I want for the Studio Display 2? Well, number one is Apple, please, no more 60 hertz. Let's make it Pro Motion. Okay. The other thing I want is a larger display. I want to go 32 inches. Now, the Pro Display XDR, that's great. That's 6K, 32 inches, fantastic. But I'm not going to spend $5,000 on a display that is not 120 hertz. And I think most people are also not going to do that. Now, Apple's been working on it, and the rumors have been around. Oh, sorry, my guest here is... She's mad at Apple, too. This is a Challenger, by the way. No, not named after the space shuttle, named after an airplane, Challenger. But so my wish, the things that we've seen poking around with Studio Display have been OLED, because it's 2026 Apple. My MacBook has OLED. Why doesn't my Studio Display? Explain that to me. Or sorry, my MacBook, my iPad has OLED. My iPhone has OLED. Why doesn't my Studio Display? Okay. The other thing is 120 hertz. Like, come on, guys. It's when you use ProMotion, we use the Apple term, on a MacBook, and you go to your Studio Display, it just feels slow and sluggish. The other thing would be a larger display. It's not 2010 anymore, 2015. We would like to have 32-inch displays, or ideally even a bit larger. And we'll pay for it. We'll pay the Apple tax. Just give us the display, please. Now, looks like my dreams are going to be crushed because Apple is going to go for 90 hertz. Why? This probably has something to do with limitations of Thunderbolt, which personally, I'll just connect two cables. I'd be more than happy to do that, but that is so anti-Apple that it will never happen. Is it worth the upgrade? Guys, I've never used 90 hertz. What do you think? Like, I feel like it's like, this is a bit better, but is it really, really worth it? I don't know. I don't know if it's worth it. Will it be OLED? I don't know. Probably not. Will Apple release a Pro Display XDR upgrade as well? They haven't. There's been no leaks to support that. See, the problem with Apple is they've gotten to this point as a company where they can just kind of really just do these minor updates, like Creator Studio. You guys heard of Creator Studio? Creator Studio is it's pretty interesting. Actually, let's pull up Creator Studio. Yeah, it's definitely rage bait. There's no question. Hopefully that's a mistake. Hopefully it's not. But yeah. If I can type properly. Ooh, Macromers is slow right now. So I'll explain it while that's loading. Creator Studio was basically Apple repackaging their pro applications. Final Cut Pro 10, arguably, in my view, the most frictionless video editor for creating content. Keynote, which is a great, I like it better than PowerPoint. It's great for creating presentations, even some like graphic design. And then there's some other applications they bundle with it too. As a subscription for $10 a month, and you get some new AI tools. I'm very sad about Final Cut. Final Cut was something that was fantastic, and Apple just kind of left it on the shelf and didn't really deal with it. They, kept. Here we go. That took way too long. Oop. Yeah. So Apple Creator Studio. Yeah, Macromers is having some trouble. So actually, let's check, see if there's anything going on right now. Now, nothing that should be affecting Macromers. Oh yeah, we're gonna talk about that. I lied. There's more space news, guys. There's always gonna be more space news. I will always find a way to mix in space news. So pull this up here. I lied. It's $12.99 a month. So here's the thing. When you're as big as Apple, you can just repackage your slop, throw in a couple new features, and call it a new thing. And it's very troubling, but it's a cycle that all companies go in, right? Companies first are nobody. They're ants. They grow. Then they become a threat. Then they're the challenger in their industry. Then they become one of many successors, and they become a champion. And champions eventually die. Apple is in the champion stage. They have dominated smartphones. They've dominated really nice desktop computers. We're a dominant cloud provider. They've fumbled the ball with AI. They're fumbling the ball with their pro displays and the pro community. Apple has neglected the pro community for the last 15 years. See if this article wants to even load. And it's really quite sad because there really still isn't anyone making consumer hardware like Apple. Or other consumer hardware, yes, but I would say nothing's pretty great. But on the desktop side, there's no widely accepted operating system like macOS that's Unix-based, really great. Hopefully Linux will be the one that comes out, but there's still some hurdles to overcome there. Just ticked off 30% of our audience, but I love Linux. I want to use Linux as my daily driver. I think it's amazing. Here we go. Finally, the article loaded. It's not there yet, guys. It's not there. All right, Apple's Creator Studio app. Yeah, so here's all the apps. And it's a pretty cool idea. But it just hurts me because Final Cut really has not had any new features in the last 15 years. It just hasn't. and I'm not saying, I mean, it's now you can do 8K workflows and all. It just hasn't had any like, oh my gosh, this amazing thing. You got Blackmagic with DaVinci Resolve being able to do multi-user workflows. And that's pretty hard to do. And I don't think they've quite cracked that coconut, but they're working on it. And we've played with it, and it's pretty cool. It does not work perfectly. It definitely feels like a beta product. But it's because of that we're using DaVinci Resolve now instead of Final Cut. Even though personally, I prefer editing in Final Cut. I think it's a more intuitive user experience. It's easier for me to get the video to what I want it to be. But DaVinci just has the tools that we need. And it's more powerful, and we're not going to run into a bottleneck where we have to use some plugin or some weird hack to do something. So Final Cut, Apple, step up your game there. All right, back to space news. So NASA just delayed Artemis 2 back going back to the moon, which this is because of a hydrogen leak they had. I don't know if they'll do a rollback or not. That's not been confirmed, but it is quite sad. But you know what that means? That means that for some of us who weren't able to make that February 6th launch, we'll get to make the one in March. And that actually worked out for me better, which is awesome. I will be going. It's definitely one you don't want to miss. This is one of those that you really don't want to miss for a couple of reasons. Space programs often get canceled, and this is going to be humanity's return to the moon since 1970, 72. So it's a major milestone, and this will mark the furthest that human beings have ever went into space ever. Like not since the 60s ever, because the furthest we ever got was Apollo 13. But due to the weird orbit that Artemis is doing, they're going to be taken further away from the moon than anyone's ever been, and thus further away from the Earth. So you don't want to miss it. It's going to be great. Does this mark NASA's having issues? This program has been delayed. This is really the Constellation program recrafted in a lot of ways, but this program has been delayed. It was supposed to be boots in the moon by 2024. And it looks like we're going to be doing our Artemis 2, which is just the orbital flight. The next flight is boots in the moon in 26. So I wouldn't be surprised if this got pushed to July. If they did push it to July, there'd be some political finagling to do it on the 4th, I'm sure, which would be pretty cool for America's 250th to be on the moon. But this is expected. This is a brand new vehicle. And NASA's philosophy is, I will say, it is a bit of a, we can be a bit harsher with NASA because their philosophy is one of perfection, not of innovating towards excellence. So SpaceX blows up rockets every day. Hey, let's get, they've had they're on a Starship integrated flight test 12 will be next, and they haven't delivered any payload because their philosophy is, hey, let's blow it up and see what happens. So let's engineer this because we are trying to bleed, we're on the bleeding edge of what we're capable of doing with material science, with rocketry. We're pushing the rocket equation to the limit. So the best simulation is the real world. So let's simulate the real world. Whereas NASA's is, hey, let's spend 10 years with blueprints and try to engineer the perfect thing and do our test that just works. So when these failures happen, it does indicate perhaps that SpaceX's philosophy is a better philosophy, which, by the way, this isn't a question of the NASA philosophy versus the SpaceX philosophy. It's really the new NASA philosophy versus the old NASA philosophy. 1950s, 60s, NASA was blowing up rockets every day down at the Cape. And it's actually some of the documentaries you'll hear the astronauts talk about, hey, we're training to go to the moon, but every day I hear kaboom, and that's a bit concerning, guys. But that was their philosophy, and I think it's a better philosophy. You can go, let's apply this to network engineering. You can go and watch all of the courses every single day on, how to build the optimal network. You can watch all of our tutorials, and you'll learn. You'll learn a great deal. But you will never learn in the same way if you just go out and do it yourself. The way that I initially learned how networking works was not by watching YouTube videos. I got an old PC that I had, old compact PC, and I took it apart. I got a network card off eBay for $50, put it in there, and I figured out by watching Tech Syndicate back in the day. They did a video on turning your old PC into a high-performance router. I watched their video, learned how to basically make a bootable USB with Rufus, and then I installed pfSense and broke my home network. And this is about, I'm old now, more than 10 years ago. And I learned about networking. I learned about DHCP. I learned about physical addressing. I learned about NACs. I learned about subnetting. I learned about DNS. And what was great about pfSense back in the day is it required you to do all those things manually. Unify is great, but it's really not the best net platform to learn it if you're just a beginning network engineer, because when things go south, you don't understand what's happening behind the scenes. But I learned through trial. And so what the best innovation is one where we learn by trial. And so I hope to see NASA return to this, and I think they will in the future. Now, the other reason you guys need to go see Artemis is, and I hope I'm wrong here, there's a good chance this could be the last SLS flight. And the reason why I say that is if they encounter other issues, and even if they don't, it doesn't really make sense for the SLS to exist for the Artemis program, because we have Starship being fully and rapidly reusable. Now, Starship is not flight ready for the moon yet. That will be a major concern. And there's some political kerfuffling about that. But it's going to be significantly more cost effective to send Artemis astronauts up to space in a Starship when Starship is ready over Artemis. How much more cost effective? Well, Starship is about, Elon thinks it's going to be under 5 million. Let's say it's 20 million, okay? Because how much does Artemis cost? Somewhere between 1 and 3 billion. To give you an idea of how much of a cost difference that is, imagine if every time you had to go out to eat, it was $3,000 versus $20. That is the cost difference. So there's a good chance that we may not see a whole lot of more SLS flights. And the big thing with that is we're probably never going to see solid rocket boosters. The shuttle used solid rocket boosters. This uses a more powerful version of that. But the future of reusability is going to be liquid stage rocket engines. And so SRBs are you can reuse them, but it's it's literally a solid fuel that they're filled with, and you burn that off like a candle almost. And it's literally like a giant candle is the best way to describe it. But they're not really ideal for reuse. So that being said, there's nothing like the thunder and the shake of an SRB. And if you've never gotten to see shuttle, this is probably your last chance to see SRBs. And I didn't see Artemis 1. I regret not going. I had some friends that went and watched it from the Saturn V facility over at the Cape. Friends that had watched other launches. This particular friend had seen Starship. He'd seen, seen shuttle, and he said, nothing hits your chest like this. This is insane. So I'm looking forward to going and seeing it, and make sure you guys go watch that. But Matthew was not able to make it here tonight, unfortunately, but he will be here next Friday night as we continue the Layer 3 Live. I'm really curious if those of you guys who are watching. I know we have a small audience. We're going to try to build this over the next several weeks as we continue streaming. What do you want to see us cover here on Layer 3? You want to see us talk about space? You want to see us talk about network engineering, some of our theories and opinions on engineering? Let us know down in the comments below. Until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye for now.